Organizations pour billions into equity and inclusion initiatives every year. Yet, look closely at their architecture, and the stress fractures of systemic discrimination remain. Despite thick policy manuals and mandatory training, the internal friction continues to rise. We see it in climbing turnover, spikes in HR complaints, and a toxic workplace culture. This failure happens because of a diagnostic error. Leadership teams are designing strategies that treat the visible behavioral symptoms while completely ignoring the hidden underlying pathogen. Introducing a new behavioral policy without addressing the source of the behavior is like watering the leaves of a dying tree. It provides the illusion of care, but guarantees long-term institutional failure. To accurately map this problem, we rely on Dr. Shungu M'gadzah's bias impact tree. This model isolates the etiology, the root cause of systemic discrimination. Alongside it, we use the 6 stages framework. This acts as the clinical metric, tracking an individual or organization's behavioral trajectory across a defined spectrum. These two tools operate together as a unified system. The tree maps the mechanics of toxicity from the ground up, while the 6 stages framework measures its severity on a rigorous continuum from -6 to +6. Achieving systemic equity requires a dual approach. Leaders must diagnose and treat the root etiology of bias using the tree, and track the resulting behavioral progress using the 6 stages metric. At the very bottom of the diagram lies the root system. Here, unconscious biases operate like viral pathogens. For the most part, they go entirely undetected beneath the surface of daily operations. But those hidden viruses eventually produce visible results in the canopy. The leaves represent manifested symptoms. These are the tangible outcomes like sexism, racism, and bullying that eventually cause institutional collapse. If we plot an average, untested organization on the 6 stages framework, it typically hovers around the center. This is the baseline condition, stage -1 and +1. At this level, people are mostly unaware and inactive. They have limited exposure to systemic realities. They might show emerging curiosity, but their primary default is simply maintaining the status quo. This baseline is highly unstable. Without deliberate, proactive intervention, an organization resting at 0 will inevitably slide downward, defaulting to its unchecked biases. When root biases are denied or ignored, the entire structure enters a state of decline. Systemic rot sets in, and the organization begins a steep descent down the negative axis. The descent starts at stage -2. Individuals become dismissive and avoidant. They acknowledge diversity issues, but frame them as exaggerated, resulting in passive resistance and the subtle invalidation of marginalized experiences. If left unchecked, the culture degrades to stage -3. Hostility and rejection. Here, people actively attack those advocating for equity and aggressively reject concepts like privilege and unconscious bias. At stage -4, the strategy shifts to blaming and deflecting. Individuals protect the status quo by using gaslighting and manipulation, shifting the blame for societal challenges onto those who are different. This crosses a critical danger threshold into stage -5. Discriminatory views become deeply entrenched. Harmful stereotypes and verbally aggressive behaviors are openly promoted and validated by peers. The terminal point of this regressive spiral is stage -6, extremist leadership. The individual or organization actively seeks to recruit others into hostile, radical ideologies, inciting division and fear. Ignoring root biases does not put an organization on pause. It acts as a direct accelerant, forcing a regressive spiral into irreversible institutional toxicity. Survival requires the opposite approach: continuous, proactive weeding and pruning. When root biases are aggressively treated as the organization grows, the trajectory shifts up the positive axis. Real progress begins at stage +2, discomfort and awakening. Individuals feel an internal conflict. They become uneasy with their own long-held assumptions and experience the friction required for genuine growth. This friction propels them to stage +3. They move into developing an understanding of how systems of power actually operate, and they begin openly acknowledging their own privilege. At stage +4, they become highly engaged and reflective. They gain the confidence to unpack complex systemic inequalities and actively work to identify their own unintentional biases. Stage positive 5 elevates this into active allyship. As systems thinkers and advocates, individuals leverage their own influence and power to create structurally equitable spaces, even when it is politically difficult. The peak state is stage positive 6, the transformational leader. Here, the focus shifts from individual action to collective transformation, modeling inclusive leadership to drive systemic justice. Moving up the positive axis is never the result of a static corporate mandate. It is the direct output of deliberate, continuous cultivation of the organizational root system. There is a strict temporal variable to this process. Identifying and treating root biases is significantly easier when the organizational tree is young. Over time, unchecked cultures and beliefs calcify. The metaphorical soil surrounding the organization becomes highly rigid, making the roots almost impossible to access. While this calcification makes change exponentially harder, the diagnostic models confirm it is never too late to begin authentic equity and inclusion work. However, leaders must understand the math. Delaying root analysis guarantees that future cultural interventions will require vastly more resources and inflict far greater operational disruption. These internal metrics do not stay confined to the boardroom. The trajectory an organization takes ultimately cascades outward, dictating broader societal outcomes. The stage -6 pathway produces terminal symptoms at scale. It fuels generational trauma, widespread intolerance, and systemic violence. These aren't abstract risks. When institutional biases are allowed to operate as undetected viruses, they manifest into lethal consequences for marginalized people. Conversely, the stage positive sex pathway establishes the bedrock for a functional society. It builds environments defined by psychological safety, emotional literacy, and systemic equity. The internal health of an organization's root system does not exist in a vacuum. It directly dictates the physical safety and stability of the external world. Attempting to treat the symptoms of discrimination without addressing the underlying etiology is an exercise in guaranteed failure. The 6 stages framework gives leaders the exact metrics required to diagnose where their organization currently stands on that continuum. Authentic inclusion work offers no quick fixes. It demands the courage to conduct continuous, rigorous root cultivation, day after day. Transformational leadership requires looking past the leaves and doing the hard work in the dark to cure the roots.